The Holy Gospel is written in the 21st chapter of St. John, beginning at the 15th verse. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he had said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you that when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. When you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. If you've been here all the last 5 or 6 weeks, this gospel text might have sounded familiar to you, and it is. Because, strangely enough, it is the same exact gospel lesson that we had the third Sunday after Easter. The story about Jesus confronting Peter and asking if he loved him, and Peter's threefold response. And maybe you might not remember that sermon. We covered that pretty well. And so, because that has already been used very recently, I chose to just be a little different. No particular text, but I'll tell you where the inspiration for this message this morning came from. It came from our confirmation class. One of the assignments in our confirmation lesson every time we meet is bring one question that you have. It might be on the question of faith, of morals, of interpretation of Bible, anything religious. And it can be something that you bring on your own or something that you talked over with loved ones, parents, grandparents, whatever. Just bring a question that you would like to have answered. And I might add that I can't answer every one of them totally, and some I don't have answers for at all. But generally, we do pretty well with the questions. But this question that came is one that I get all the time. And anybody who's been in the clergy field or anybody that's been a Christian has been confronted with a question. And the question is, why does a good, loving God let all these bad things happen? Why does a loving God not interfere, take care of things? Because after all, he could really take care of it if he wanted to, because he's all-powerful. And there are some people that use that as an excuse for losing their faith. Well, I practiced, I went to church regularly, I contributed, I did this for other people, and still I'm suffering. Why does God let that happen? And so they leave the faith. An excuse. Let's make God the culprit of everything that is going on. So I attempt to answer that. And one of the readings I did very recently kind of added to that, and I give him credit for some of the ideas today, some of the illustrations. Fred Speakman, a Methodist minister, now deceased, put a book entitled Love Is Something You Do. And there was a chapter entitled there, Why God is in Trouble with You. Edna St. Vincent Millay was a poet and a playwright. She passed away about 75 years ago, and though she was an agnostic, she constantly wrote on religious things, asking religious questions, making statements about what she found relevant in the Bible and what she didn't find relevant. She talked a lot about a God who she said she didn't know whether she believed in or not, and said she had high respect for a Jesus who she said she did not choose to follow. But there was an interesting statement that she made in regard to the creation. And she said, if I had the power of God, and I had the ability to do everything, move anything, create something out of nothing, she said, I think I could have done just as good a job as God did. You know, as I read creation, I thought to myself, it really must be nice to, well, throw up a planet and throw up a star and create a galaxy that all can exist in, and then sprinkle it with human beings. And she said, I think with the same ability and knowledge that God had, I think I could have done a better job. But she said, it is that other thing, that other trouble that got into that really appalls me. And she says this, he created a human heart. He created a human being. And he turned it loose. He gave it free will. He gave it the ability to make a good choice or a bad choice. And this person, this heart, goes a different way. It doesn't go the way God intended it to, because it had the power to do that. It was given the command not to deal with one of the trees in the garden, and he did. He chose to go another way. And then Edna says he tries to win it back again. He looks at our hearts that's layered, filled with all kinds of wrongdoings, and he tries to unravel it. Tries to understand without hating us, to punish without destroying us, to persuade our wicked ways to take our wicked ways and replace them with God's good. She said, I can't understand why he did that. I don't understand what the purpose was. No good can come of it. But I do applaud him for trying. Another poet said, be cautious of your plans for mankind. Because if you have too great a plans for mankind, you'll go down a trap like God created. He said, if you see a child playing in the corner with his toy soldiers and lining them up, getting ready to march, and he kind of controls everything he does with them, stop and ask him this question. Would you like your soldiers to live, to have life? Would you like to have them come alive? And he said, I'll bet you'll see on that child's face a big smile. Boy, would I like that. I'd like to see my soldiers have life and get up and march. He said, in some corner of the world of creation, God looked at his 6 days of creation, or 5 days of creation, and he said he needed something more. He wanted something that he could create that would have a relationship. Not the quiet obedience of the plants and the trees, not because of the habits of certain kinds of animals, but sons and daughters that he could relate to, that he could love, and create a perfect world for them, and that they would respond in loving obedience. And then Genesis says, God saw that all things were good. And he made mankind. And he said to mankind, I will give you dominion over my world. I give you total responsibility for my creation. That's how much I trust you. That's how much I love you. And then the problem was that people are not toys. People have the ability to decide if they will do the will of God, if they will be the creatures that God intended. The little boy might not realize that when you ask him if he wants his soldiers to live. But he will soon discover, if those things came to life, that maybe he'd like them back where he could control them all again. Because they might take their skinny little legs and walk in a different direction. Not going in file like they were when the child controlled them. They might even look at him, snarl at him, spit at him, and create disarray in a world that was recently very peaceful and orderly. And see, that's what's been happening to God ever since Eden. So that question in confirmation, why does it happen? It gets down to this kind of a statement. It is faith's realization that earth's or our unhappiness comes not by God's intention, but with God's reluctant permission. Does not come with God's intention, but with his reluctant permission. Now, if you've been a parent, you understand that very well. I have seen very few parents who don't have dreams for their children. Have an idea sometimes that their life is planned out entirely. They will inherit the family business. And sometimes children do very well at that. You start with total control of the child. The mother is responsible for the child's life totally. And by, it starts to mature, and the parents are responsible for holding up the child as the jittery when it takes its first walk. And very, very bit by bit, freedom gets wider and wider, and control gets less and less. And those days that you were hoping for when the child would grow up and realize what great parents they had, that everything they did was in their best interest. And sometimes they tell you you didn't do such a good job. That's what happens when you have an autonomous person. No longer a child you can control, but one now that is on the same level. There was a little item that one of the writers wrote about a restaurant experience he'd had. He said this couple came in with this little child. And they had a waitress who was very knowledgeable, but very independent and probably somewhat insightful. She came to the table and she took the parents' order. And then after she'd taken the order, got their deletions and additions to the meal, she looked at the boy and she said, "And now what would you like?" And he said, "I want a hot dog." Parents said, No, he doesn't have a hot dog. Without even acknowledging that the parents were there at that point, she said, "And what do you want on the hot dog?" And so, "I want lots of ketchup." No. "And do you want French fries?" "Yes, I want French fries." No, the parents said, no, don't. Here's what we want him to have. And she said, "I will get your hot dog with the ketchup and the French fries." Now, you as a parent might not have a lot of time for that waitress, maybe not tip her very well. But what this person observed was the child looked up at his parents after the waitress had left. And he said, "She thinks I'm real." And see, that's the trouble God has with us. He thinks we're real. He gives us freedom. Is it the freedom to follow or the freedom to leave? God will bless you with 1,000 things you don't deserve or even realize. God will plead with you and warn you 1,000 other things. He will look at you from behind the cross, in which He paid the ultimate sacrifice for a life that He wants to save, which is yours and mine. But He will not dissolve that grit in ourselves by forcing us a destiny we're really not looking for. He tends to win us by treating us not as robots, but as sons. He keeps His hands off, stands by and waits and watches, like a father leaving an angry child before he can win them over again. God loves us with eyes open. He's caring and loving, but respecting us enough to not interfere until we decide we want things to be His way. God gave us a world. He said, "I give you dominion over that world. I give you life, and you have the freedom to live that life as you want." And you know, sometimes we just screw up really badly. When things happen to us, it's not with God's intention, because the Garden of Eden was a perfect place. It was individuals who chose not to follow God's way that made it an imperfect place. Until we want His help, until we ask for His help, until we try to follow the dictates that He has given us, God will always be in trouble with us because He thinks we're human. Amen.